Welcome, everybody, to the summit Healthy Body, Healthy Hair, the truth about hair loss. I'm your host, Julie Olson. Inflammation and the immune system dysregulation can often be triggered by food sensitivities that are hidden, and people don't pay attention to it because they don't even know it's happening. So I'm so excited for our guest, James LaValle, to explain this with his 35 years experience that I am going to have him explain the highlights of his career because we'd be here all day if I read through them. So, James, I'm so excited to have you here.
Well, it's good to be here. Yeah. So, yeah, I'm the academic coach here at the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine. Of course, we teach hair restoration as one of the tracks of what we do. Also chair the International Peptide Society. Been in clinical practice for the last literally 39 years now, coming up on my 40th anniversary, which it's hard to believe. But I haven't figured out how to stop that gray on the side of my head. But So it's interesting, right? I'm sure you've had speakers talk about the issues around hormones, and I know you had a pharmacist talk about drug nutrient depletion. I actually, wrote 4 databases on drug-induced nutrient depletions, and it's really important to understand. And it all starts to come down to when you have nutrient depletions, it just gets worse if your gut isn't able to absorb things. And so I think it's great that we're having this topic about food sensitivities and how it plays a role in inflammation signaling. And not just that, how it plays a role in how you may be unable to absorb the nutrients that your hair needs in order to repair, in order to stay healthy. So I'm excited about our talk.
Well, do you want to first start out and explain the difference between food sensitivities, food intolerances, and food allergies, which people are often confused about?
Sure. So if you use the classic term of an allergy is when you develop skin wheals or hives, or you start to begin to have trouble breathing, right? And you can go into what's called anaphylaxis. And so, people have food allergies. Some people like peanuts, right, or corn, or those kind of things, where they have to carry an EpiPen. And then there's sensitivities and intolerances where during the course of your life, you somehow created a permeable gut, meaning that your gut lining is now compromised. It gets what's called leaky. So the kind of popular terms, leaky gut. But what really happens is that your intestinal lining is supposed to be tight like this, and whether it's via stress, diet, drugs, environmental burden, you name it, excessive exercise will do it. All of a sudden, could be infection. All of a sudden, those gaps happen in between your lining of your two cells. And when that happens, food particles, bacteria can kind of get into the bloodstream. Your immune system can start to be reactive to those foods. And now all of a sudden, your immune system is now creating what's known as a sensitivity. So, what's different about a sensitivity is you may notice being foggy headed. You may notice joint aches. You may notice weight gain. You could notice feeling gassy and bloated or having symptoms of irritable bowel. It's a contributor to heart disease. It's a contributor to mood disorders. There's all kinds of issues that come up when people become food sensitive, but they don't necessarily have skin wheals or hives or rashes, or all of a sudden have an anaphylaxis and their airways closing. Instead, they're having all these other symptoms.
And they're often hidden, like I said at the beginning. And but it's like picking a scab. If you don't take those foods out, at least for 6 months, to get your gut in better shape, it's like picking a scab. And that's what I tell my clients, because often that's the missing piece to their inflammation. And inflammation, of course, is a major root cause of hair loss and also weight gain. A lot of these women come to me and my gosh, they're eating quote unquote well, they're eating healthy, but they can't take off that weight. And it's not until they see the data, especially in these food sensitivity allergy tests, that they actually realize that a lot of times it's healthy foods that are causing that inflammation. And then it's a vicious cycle. I mean, inflammation is systemic. And but it really is important for what I do, especially for people with hair loss, to to figure out what food sensitivities they have, because also for them to see it on paper. Because there's one thing you can say, well, you have a problem with gluten or dairy, but when they actually see it and they see the different markers, not just the IgG, but the IgE, the IgG4, and the complements, it really is a game changer. So, Jim, do you want to talk more about that?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think the first thing is it could be you're eating almonds. You think you're doing a great job by using almond milk. You took dairy out of your diet, but you're drinking almond milk and you're sensitive to almonds and it's triggering inflammation. And so it's understanding that it's not just like the quote high allergen foods. By now everybody's kind of gone gluten free to see how they feel, and people take dairy out of their diet. Some people take soy out of their diet. They take corn out of the diet, which is all good, right? I mean, those are good things to try and see how you feel. But you have to realize that you could be reacting to foods that are very healthy. And so what happens is you eat a food, and when your immune system gets triggered, it's not like it just stays in your intestine. That immune reaction actually creates the release of these inflammatory compounds called cytokines. And inflammatory cytokines can end up appearing anywhere in your body. In particular, you could get them in your scalp, where you could end up where the hair bulb is under attack to these inflammatory compounds. And of course, as we have this inflammatory response, we lose blood flow to the periphery. So you lose blood flow to the scalp. And that's a big problem, right? Because that induces what's called fibrosis, right? Where all of a sudden you're not getting nutrients to the scalp and to the hair bulb. And now I can't deliver nutrients because when your gut is permeable, because of, once you're developing food sensitivity, your gut has become permeable. It doesn't have the integrity, it doesn't have the protection, but even more importantly, it doesn't have the ability to absorb the nutrients. So if you're pounding collagen powder to get your hair better, right? Everybody's like, I'm going to take silica, I'm going to take collagen. Or wait a second, they found out they were low in iron. Any of those things. If your gut is, quote, leaky or permeable, you're not going to absorb those things and utilize them like you could. And so, it's important to understand that as you lose the capacity for these tight junctions to stay tight and gap, you're losing a couple things that are key in hair loss. One, the ability to get nutrients into your body, like amino acids. Like we all know you need proteins and amino acids for healthy hair. Iron, really important, right? Things like collagen that deliver obviously amino acids, but also, collagen itself. Um, all these different nutrients, whether it's folate or B12, all important in zinc. My gosh, so important. But you're losing your ability to get those into your body. And one of the things I try to get people to understand is that, stress is a known thing to cause hair loss, right? I mean, people all talk about, hey, my cortisol went up, my hair's falling out, high stress. The thing about stress that's interesting is that when your stress levels are high, you're sending a signal. There's a nervous system that connects the brain to the gut. It's called the enteric nervous system. And so when you're releasing all those stress hormones, the net effect of that is that your gut becomes more permeable because the release of cortisol, which is a stress hormone, has a direct impact on the integrity of your gut. The second thing that happens is that cortisol causes the release of a cytokine, an immune compound called interleukin 6. And when IL 6 goes up in your gut, there's these bonds. They're called tight junctions. They're like this, that are in between the cells. And what happens is that tight junction starts to break down, and now we leave the gaps between the cells to no longer to be able to absorb nutrients, to allow bacteria to get in, to create proteins that aren't fully digested, to be reacted to. And that's how all of a sudden you do a food allergy test, and everybody, you're looking at it going, wait a second, why are green beans on my test? I love green beans. Aren't green beans healthy? Well, yeah, they're healthy if you're not reacting to them. And to your point, you have to avoid them for a period of time and work on your gut. And if stress is a component, work on your stress response in order to really heal that gut lining and take those food sensitivities out of the way.
Right. And then you throw in loss of oral tolerance. Can you explain that to the listeners? Because that's not really well known what that's all about.
Well, I mean, the big thing is that your immune system has a certain amount of, let's say, tolerability to whatever you're going to put in your intestine, right? But when your immune system starts to become more reactive, you lose that tolerance, and that tolerance is mainly lost because as those tight junctions open up, you get a you're over the threshold of your reactivity. So you can no longer tolerate a food that maybe even be a high allergen food that you normally were okay to. But the issue becomes that when the gut gets leaky and it gets into the bloodstream, what happens is you're presenting that food to something called an antigen presenting cell. Antigen presenting cell. And what an antigen is, right, is it's the allergen that your body is going to start to react to. So if you keep presenting, I'm going to keep eating bread every day and I got a leaky gut and I don't have celiac sprue, but man, I'm eating a ton of hybridized wheat, and your gut is permeable and it keeps presenting it here, I want to react again. That antigen presenting cell gets upregulated. And then what happens is you make something called an epitope. And what an epitope is, it's this little kind of, hook that comes out of that immune cell, and it's waiting for that next bit of gluten to hit. And it hits that little hook, and then the immune system goes wild. And so loss of tolerance, and a lot of people go, oh my God, I can never eat gluten again. Well, the reality is you can get tolerance back. And I'm not a big fan of people eating gluten all the time, but I don't necessarily think that people, if they've overcome their immune loss of tolerance and they're eating at least an artisanal grain, that they can probably tolerate it here and there. We hear about it all the time. People go to Italy, they eat wheat when they normally can't. They go, oh my God, I can tolerate it. And so I think it's important for people to say, first of all, you can change the equation of food sensitivity through working on your gut. B, it's not forever for a lot of the foods. Sometimes it is. I know for me, cow's dairy, I've never been able to shake my cow's dairy sensitivity. I'm gonna gain water. I'm gonna feel puffy if I eat too much cow's milk based stuff. It's that simple. Um, but you can overcome a lot of these things, and it is important to look at the different categories of immune reactivity. So you mentioned them: IgE, IgG, IgG4, and then the complement. So why is, IgE is traditional allergy, like anaphylaxis. IgG4 actually builds up in your body to protect you against the IgE reaction. So it's basically trying to buffer it, like tell the body, hey, don't worry about going into anaphylaxis. No, you're not gonna stop breathing. The problem is if you keep pushing that IgG4 reaction, it creates all kinds of inflammation. Probably the bigger culprit in hair would be IgG4, because how much autoimmune behavior occurs because of IgG4. So if you hear about alopecia, autoimmune loss of hair, You want to know what those foods are in the IgG4 category. And the complement pathway or the adaptive immune system pathway, that's important. It's called C3 and C3b and D. When you test for those, why that's important is if you have those foods, your IgG reaction to food, which is kind of the sensitivity reaction, if you want to put it in that category, goes up about 10,000 fold. So knowing what categories you're reacting to is super important. Understanding that in many cases it's not forever, but then also understanding that ignoring it is also an issue because those reactivities are going to continue to build. More and more foods will become a problem, and that's going to accelerate that inflammatory response, which creates all that antigen antibody activity in the follicles of the hair.
Well said. That's a lot for people to digest. Let's go back to foods that people commonly eat. Like someone eats, you know, eggs most mornings per
Oh,
se. Then, oh yeah, it's a common allergen food. But
so
any
big.
like, or someone that eats a ton of chicken, they're most likely to become intolerant to those foods, right? Since it's constantly
Yeah, it's
being
repetitive.
eaten, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, you could have a perfectly, maybe your gut lining's pretty decent, but if you keep eating the same food, so every day I have chicken and broccoli. Every day I wake up and I eat eggs, which are from chicken. Every day, I'm having an almond milk with pea protein. It's one of those big things people don't understand. So if you just keep having repetitive food, that can lead to sensitivities. And that's why I've always taught people have a big variety of food. Like try not to eat the same foods over and over again. And pea protein's a great example. When you eat peas are called a high lectin food. And lectins are basically, you know, this hook that gets stuck into those immune cells and you start to react to them quickly. So higher lectin foods people get sensitive to quicker. So the issue becomes, well, now I'm going to take peas, which I'm used to eating those nice little peas, right? And now I'm going to dry it. I'm going to grind them up. I'm going to micronize them so that the powder is really small, and now I'm going to drink that powder. And so now you've got this, just imagine instead of having, being able to cover maybe your kitchen table with the amount of mashed peas, you've just covered your whole house with micronized peas. And that's what's happening in your gut. And when your gut is permeable now, all of a sudden that high lectin pea powder is getting all into your chemistry. And that's why we're seeing so many people with pea and rice allergies because everybody's gone plant based with their protein powders. And they're drinking either pea or rice mostly. Some are going with some like, cachava or some other newer, like watermelon seed protein, pumpkin seed protein. Same thing. People are going to use them too much and they become sensitive to it if they don't rotate it, right? So it's really important for people to understand about that whole concept of rotate your foods. You'll learn if you do a food allergy test. I mean, whoever you do it with will end up hopefully teaching you that you need to rotate your foods. And I think it's an incredibly important piece. And it's just good for your health because guess what? That's how we get more variety of nutrients.
Mm, absolutely. Now, I want to ask you about your latest research in the drug induced microbiome disruption.
Oh, yeah, that's
Switching
an
gears
interesting
here.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's you know, people are taking so many drugs, right? There's just people are on a lot of drug therapy. And what we're finding out is there are certain drug categories that when people are on these drugs chronically, it changes the microbiome in your gut, which means the beneficial flora start to change to more unfriendly flora. For a good example, and people go, oh, well, I know about that. That's antibiotics. Well, it's way more than antibiotics. It's antibiotics It's birth control pills. It's metformin, which is kind of like the darling anti-aging drug everybody's talking about. Oh, I got to be on metformin. Well, a third of people get diarrhea from metformin. That's changing their microbiome. Statin medications, opioids, so pain medications,
Antidepressants.
acid blocking, antidepressants, exactly. So there's a lot, about 25% of the drugs that are on the market are thought to change the microbiome. You're on an uphill battle when that's the case, right? Like, for example, if you're on a acid blocking medication, and people are only supposed to be on those for a very short period of time, and instead they end up being on them for years and years. And part of the reason is they have undiscovered food allergies, and that's why they get GERD and they get belchy and burpy and feel uncomfortable after they eat. So if they would just figure out their food allergies, they wouldn't need the Durant H2 blocker or the acid blocker. But that's another story, right? But the point being is that it starts to permanently change those beneficial flora, that you have to remember the microbiome is driving that inflammatory signaling. Flora keeps the inflammation signaling down in your body. Unfriendly flora triggers the inflammation signaling. And remember, it's that enteric nervous system just doesn't connect the brain down to the gut. If you throw off the gut flora, and now you're not making serotonin, you're not making dopamine, you're starting to create inflammatory chemicals, that travels to the brain and triggers something known as neuroinflammation. And so you have a lot of people that'll say, oh, yeah, gosh, I'm foggy headed. I don't like to make decisions after 2 o'clock. I feel like I'm pushing a thought through jello, right? A lot of times you've got neuroinflammation and it can be linked to the gut. A lot of the cognitive in COVID long haulers, there's papers published showing that their gut gets dysbiotic, unfriendly flora, and that's what's responsible for some of the foggy brain symptoms. So you just have to think about the gut really being a big source of inflammatory chemistry. So we know that inflammation chemistry leads to hair loss, but it's not just the hair. It's not just the inflammatory chemistry. You have to remember you can't absorb nutrients as well. And so whether it's the drug-induced microbiome that's causing that because you're on medications chronically, or it's a drug-induced nutrient depletion. So remember, you need zinc in order to keep the intestinal integrity intact. Well, there's multiple medications that deplete zinc. Drugs like blood pressure drugs called angiotensin receptor blockade or angiotensin inhibiting drugs. Those are great at depleting zinc. A very common drug given out to men and women. So I think where you want to think about is for hair loss, where in some cases it could be one thing. For many people, I think there's several things going on. They're under stress, their gut's off, their diet's poor, they're reacting to maybe some foods. Maybe they're not exercising enough to kind of balance their immune system, or you could be somebody who's over exercising. There's a lot of evidence now when you overtrain, the gut gets leaky. So once again, you think you're doing something good. I'm training 2 hours a day. Why am I losing my hair? Well, heightened cortisol, hard training, leaky gut. Now you got that cascade of problems going on.
I wish you could tell my husband that. He won't listen to me. He trains, he's addicted to it, and he teaches jujitsu, and his C-reactive protein is really elevated. And I'm telling him that's why. But anyway, yeah, case in point. Because I know you work with a
No,
lot of professional athletes as well. So how do you maneuver through that and explaining that to them?
well, it's different. A professional athlete's getting paid to do what they do. And
Sure.
so they have to put up with a little bit of the sacrifice that they're putting their body under a lot of duress. They get paid well most of the time, but it's a lot of duress. But what we talk about is not how hard you train, it's about how well you recover. So part of that recovery is, what is your nutrition like? What is your stress management like? What is your sleep like? Because those are all incredibly important in terms of managing kind of the chronic inflammation that occurs when people are exercising. And remember, long distance runners, you hear about runners' diarrhea, right? Where people that do endurance sports end up getting kind of irritable bowel or leaky gut, or they get chronic diarrhea. Well, why did that happen? It's not a chance. Your body's not meant to run from a white tiger for 26 miles, right? Your body, when you think about it, because when you're running for 26 miles, what your brain thinks is, I'm running from a white tiger for 26 miles. And that usually creates changes in your cortisol pattern, and as well as it throws off your sex hormones. So, as we know, when you throw your sex hormones off, that also can have a dramatic impact on hair loss as well.
Right. And some of these bodybuilders that are in these contests, I mean, the way they diet, and then right before the event they basically starve themselves and dehydrate themselves. I've seen a lot of hair loss in that community.
Especially in the, like, just even physique or the bikini model area, where they're getting more and more aggressive with diet, maybe using one or two performance enhancing nutrients or something. I mean, all of that plays a role with them, and it all goes back to that thought of, the more you put your body under stress, that gut brain connection is ground zero for causing immune shifts. And start to create that, now your body doesn't just say, "Oh, I'm going to put inflammatory compounds in this shoulder, but not up here." It's indiscriminate. It's going to your immune cells are going, "Hey, we're being told to release inflammatory compounds. Let's go." Right? And so it's everywhere. And people, some things express themselves in, first maybe in hair, maybe it's an achy joint, maybe the belly's off. But I think that with hair loss, it's chronic and insidious. If you're noticing thinning of your hair, and yes, you can attribute that to the bulb and the fact that, in a man, maybe it's an androgen issue. But people need to pay attention more to, well, what's my diet like? Am I getting the nutrients I need? What is my stress like? Do I have any symptoms of a permeable gut? And the other thing that's really interesting is, sometimes everybody goes, "Well, I don't have any gut issues." I have people that come to me and their issue is their hip hurts and their hair's thinning. Right, 49-year-old woman, perimenopausal, loves to go hiking. This is a real case. Left hip. Oh my God, I think I'm gonna need a hip replacement. My doctor says it's definitely inflamed in there. There's a problem. And then it's like, oh yeah, by the way, my hair. And you work her up, and you find out she's got a serious gluten intolerance. She's eggs, chicken, all that's coming. And all of a sudden you don't realize that. Oh, hey, if I take those foods away, you mean I don't have to have that pain? Do you mean my hair can get thicker? Yes, exactly. That's exactly it. And I would encourage people, if they are working with a practitioner, really work on repairing that gut. Get rid of the bad bugs, put in some good bugs, give some nutrients that help to restore that lining. And if you're under stress, it is not a sign of weakness to take an adaptogen or a nutrient that keeps your body calmer during the course of the day. That's a win. That's the oldest and most sacred form of nutrient that's been given in medicine since the beginning of time. Every culture, plant medicines that help people cope with stress was the number one most revered herb. There's something to that, right? So I think people, they they need to become aware that the head bone, the hair bones connected to the belly bone. And the more you get feeling that and understanding that, the more you can start to empower yourself to really kind of have a more complete whole person approach to how am I going to manage my hair. I mean, I'm sure you just had tremendous speakers about all the traditional aspects. Now, why do we use PRP in the hair? Why do you use that? Because you're trying to re-regulate the immune system, right? Well, guess what? If I'm doing PRP, I'm getting injections, but my gut's still permeable and I'm still reacting to food. That PRP injection you just spent all that money for, it's going to be less effective. It's that simple. I mean, so we all go for that. Hey, I'm getting this injection in my scalp. It's going to make my hair really grow great. And it can. I love that work. We teach that work, but we also teach about how you need to clean up an individual's chemistry in order to maximize their ability to take those kind of procedures or applications and get them to work.
Right. The PRP is really a band-aid if you don't get to the root cause first. Just
That's
like
it.
medications. I mean, it's not getting to the root cause, and the whole point of the summit is getting to the root cause of your hair loss. So you can fix it long term, not just go out and do procedure. I mean, yeah, you can get injected with cortisol. There's plenty of things you can do, but you have to figure out the root causes in your type of hair loss before you're going to have any long term success. And
Yeah. Well, how many? I mean, I've had plenty of people who went and got transplants. And they didn't take, or they didn't last. And it's, well, why do you think that happened? Because you didn't change the milieu or the terrain, right? The environment, the micro environment around the hair in order to create a lasting effect on not just saving your hair, regrowing, creating new follicle expansion, creating that reinitiation of the hair growth in the bulb, all that stuff. Yeah, make it grow, make it grow, make it grow, right? But it's how's your stress level? What kind of drug therapy you on? If you're on drug therapies like antacids and those kind of things chronically, you're gonna have to work harder. You have to be on probiotics regularly. You're going to have to, take nutrients like minerals because when you block acid in your stomach from a pill, it blocks the ability of you to absorb protein easily. So now taking, essential amino acids or taking collagen becomes more important because you can't absorb it as well. So work on repair, work on absorption, then you've got a good shot.
yeah. Wow, a lot of great tips. Or is there anything else you want to add as we wrap this up?
Oh, I think the biggest thing for folks is, first of all, food allergy tests are amazing. I've used them all the time in our practices, in our offices, and teach about them. So I think it's really important that people consider it. First of all, the cost of them, not that much for what you're learning about yourself, and it could be a key factor in really creating, I'd say, multiple benefits for an individual. So if you're feeling tired, you're feeling sluggish, you've gained weight, you're losing hair, you're achy, right? Your mood's off. You're feeling like you're pushing that dot through Jello, right? You, food sensitivities could be a really important component to you, kind of getting rid of that stuff.
And I just want to plug the fact that get a good food sensitivity test that tests the markers that we discussed, because you can get one that's just testing the IgG and it really is not going to cut it.
No, an IgE and a traditional allergist, where they're pricking your back, that doesn't tell you what's going on with the gut reactions either. So, I mean, obviously, Infinite food allergy. The Infinite food allergy panel is very comprehensive. I like that a lot. It's the one I use in practice. I think it's, great test. But I think, get a comprehensive test. Write down what meds am I on. Be honest about how much stress you're under. Be honest about the kind of foods that you pick, and then make a plan, right? Make a plan.
Make a plan and be patient. It took people a while to get where they're at, and it can take a while to get back. And Again, if they're losing their hair, there's usually more than one thing out of balance in the body. And again, food sensitivities play a role here that it's
Oh,
often overlooked.
absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more.
Well, Jim, where's the best place for people to find you?
Well, you can go to jimlaval.com. That's an easy one. They can go to metabolicCode.com. And there's all kinds of information that I've got, and they can kind of find out what I'm doing, where I'm going. But look at, I got new books coming out. I just wrote a peptide handbook. My second edition of A Blood Never Lies will come out this year, and then got a couple other interesting books coming out as well. So got a lot going on.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for today and all your valuable information. Really.
Oh, I appreciate it. Glad to be on.
All right. Well, thank you for watching the summit. And don't forget to watch the other experts and my free masterclass at the end of Healthy Body, Healthy Hair, the truth about hair loss.